In today's episode, Ameer and I try to discuss one of philosophy's oldest questions. Are people inherently good or bad? I'm Harrison.
And I'm Ameer, and we believe that one of life's most valuable assets is the gift of conversation.
In the midst of life, sometimes we forget the true power of a deep, meaningful conversation.
So take a breath, come join us,
and let's talk about life. Okay, so this is like a big philosophical debate. You know, it has been for I don't know. Ameer could probably tell us the dates. But
well, actually,
but I feel like in philosophy, and I don't even know that much about philosophy, and which is funny because we sit here every week and talk about this stuff. But the question of the day is: are people inherently good or bad, or what's going on there? And I'm gonna start with you. I'm gonna pass it over to you and hear what you think, and prepare for some quotes.
Wow. Okay, so we know the gist of it. If you're a returning viewer, you know that it's encyclopedia time. Actually, to be honest, for this topic, I don't have that much encyclopedic knowledge pertaining to this. I only have my own personal opinions shaped by my own experience. So, take everything with a grain of salt. But first thing I want to ask you, actually, I'll ask you this. Did you come up with this topic and ask me because you watched Yes Theory's video in Syria?
I haven't finished that video. First of all,
you haven't seen it yet? Okay.
I watched about half of it, maybe 15 minutes, but I wanted to sit down and finish it intentionally. Everybody watch that and watch Yes Theory if you're not.
It's so good.
No, but it was just it was just on my mind, so who knows why? But
Gotcha.
I mean, you can reference it. It's probably not going to ruin the video, but
yeah, totally. So the reason I ask is because that's kind of that's the closing premise of Thomas's entire point.
Right.
That's the closing point of Thomas's entire premise. It's kind of exploring the contrast between the destruction that he saw in Syria. Actually, first, let me give the viewers context. So basically, Yes Theory, one of the biggest YouTube channels, they make incredible content around travel, adventure, just connection and seeking discomfort, all that kind of stuff. So highly recommend that you check them out. But for their latest video, one of the people from Yes Theory went to Syria this year in 2022. They went and visited Syria for 7 days, and they went around and saw all the different. They went and saw Damascus. They went and saw Aleppo. They saw all the cities that were destroyed, all the historical artifacts, just the remnants of the brutal war that has been going on for the last 10 years. And his entire conclusion that he came to was that he met so many beautiful, incredibly helpful people. And then that was contrasted with the destruction and kind of the evil that humanity is also capable of.
Right.
And so he found himself asking, are humans inherently good or inherently bad? And I'll leave it up to you to watch his video and see his conclusion. But if I were to use that video kind of as a starting point for my own opinion, honestly, it's tough. It's tough. I think in an ideal world, I would want to say that, all people, we all have good inside of us. We all are we have an inherent proclivity towards good, but history says so much otherwise. And what I personally would like to say, and, my thoughts will become more coherent as kind of this episode goes on, but what I would like to think is that we have the potential for both within us. And I think our environment and ultimately our decisions determine what it is for every individual. I don't think there is a blanket answer. I think there's just individual people.
Yeah.
And, it's so subjective and there's so much history behind it. I kind of want to also gather some external resources for this episode, look things up and see what people think. But yeah, that's kind of my thought.
It is. I mean, it's like any kind of big philosophical debate or discussion. There's not really an answer. I think the answer is discussing it in a way, right? Because you explore what these things mean. I've been trying to think about this since when I mentioned we should talk about it, and I don't know. Instinctively, I want to say yes right away, and that's what I would say because based on my experience. Then you talk about things that have happened in history, whatever. But I would say, and I'm no expert on the history of the world, but on average, it's a few people compared to the majority. And I may be wrong here, but this is what I would like to believe, that a few people may mess up or have terrible intentions, and then it can totally skew, the view of like history because there have been absolutely terrible things that have happened
Mhm,
and continue to happen, but that
mhm,
doesn't mean that the majority of people are like that, but it
mhm.
kind of covers it up. You know what I mean? Like you look at the news, they're not ever going to share the little tiny good things that happen, but it's like everything gets masked by the bad stuff. But what I was thinking about, which kind of relates to something I've been experiencing recently, and thinking of the world um, through spirit or consciousness or just the universe, and um, viewing people as vessels for that. Like we're all the best way to like kind of visually describe it and how I've been thinking about it is like, those little like bamboo um fountains. Have you ever seen one? It's like cut at an angle and like water just
Yes, yeah,
runs through it, right?
totally, yep.
I think of the universe as that water, and humans are just that piece of bamboo that's just like channeling the water in certain directions. And maybe this makes no sense. This makes a whole lot of sense to me, but I'm going to explain it anyway. Um, and I think that ultimately it just takes a long time for that to fully run through, like clear through people. This could get into a weird topic about like reincarnation and stuff because I believe, and I think I've mentioned this before, that like you start as like not you, but like there's a spirit, and there could be an like a new spirit or an old spirit, and it doesn't matter the age. You could be like brand new in the universe, or you could be like one of the first things that have existed. And as we progress through life, we're trying to get towards this end goal of like enlightenment or whatever, and it's not like the person is just like like I said, a vessel for that in each lifetime, and they're continually learning. So I think that that is where the universe is trying to go, and because I believe that even though these evil things happen, I think that it's just like maybe those spirits are on a like they haven't learned these lessons yet or whatever. Like if they came back in however long it takes, they will learn how to get towards this enlightened place or whatever. And I think that that is, I believe, where the entire world and universe is like directed towards. So I would say that everything, like everybody is good from that kind of space. It's a whole weird rant, but that's what I think.
Mhm. Totally, yeah. So, kind of you approach and believe that, like, we're kind of the vessels shaping, like, when you mean vessels, like, do you mean like kind of our decisions or what shape? Like, just clarify that a little bit more.
Yeah, like you go through the human experience,
Mm,
learning and stuff, but that stuff is maybe gone once you're done in your human body or
mm,
whatever, but it's carried on and you accumulate these things, picking them up as you go, your spirit goes on this journey or whatever.
mm,
And we're shaped by our human experiences, but like it doesn't just stop when you die. Like it continues to pile up. The more it's like anything, the more experiences you have, you could come back in the next life and live in a super poor country, or you could come back and be like one of the richest people in the world. You're going to learn different ways of life and different things from those experiences, right? And it all compiles together. And who
mm,
knows? I could be, nobody knows. But this
mm,
is something I've just been thinking about recently, and it might change in the next what
totally.
month. But
Totally. Yeah, no, that's cool. Who do you think we were in past lives?
I don't know.
Do you
Have you
think
ever
we
done
were
a?
bros?
I mean, probably. I think like that's when I think like that,
Uh-huh.
whether it's true or not. But I think it's interesting to think about because it's like I feel like we have intertwined at some point. Like this took whatever 21 years to like for us to connect, but it had happened at some point in the past. And I would say
Mm,
the same thing about like Maria. That's why I feel so like such a strong connection to her when we first met
mhm,
and some of these things. So yes, I would say
mhm.
so. But I've done a past life regression. Have you ever done one of those? Have you heard about them?
Mm, nope.
Really interesting. It's like
Tell me about it.
it's essentially so I've mentioned before my aunt's a hypnotherapist, right?
Mm,
So you can do it through that, and it's essentially like tapping into um your like the consciousness and just to see where have you been before. And I was a little boy on a battlefield back in like the medieval times, and I remember like being abandoned, and I had this whole experience that like I just knew it was everything was so vivid, and I was like I was here. And then like I obviously got killed or something while I was like um, going through this experience again, and then it was like, wow, I'm up in the clouds, and now I'm an eagle, and I was like a bird for a while, and like different things. Anyway, so I highly recommend you do it, whether you believe in it or not. It's a
Damn.
really neat experience. Anyway,
Yeah,
we
that's
totally
very
got
cool.
off, but that was my
That's
answer. Is
very
that
cool.
because of all that, I think that like we are generally headed in that direction. Therefore, people are good.
Hmm. Okay, well, first of all, that's cool as hell, dude. What the heck? It's like being plugged into the animus and like seeing the memories of your ancestors. It's like Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed or something right there. That is very cool. Once again, I will keep an open mind to all things,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
you still need to connect me with your aunt.
Yeah, it's true. I keep
Right?
forgetting.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I think I agree with you on your point, in the sense that I think in general, I think us as a species are heading into that direction
Mhm,
of, awakening to consciousness, being
mhm,
present and transcending kind of the limitations of the human mind.
mhm,
And we'll get into that in a little bit and the limitations there. Um, and kind of the egoic dysfunction. And I'm pulling a lot of reference and inspiration just from Eckhart Tolle and Rupert
mhm.
Spira and Jiddu, J. Krishnamurti, all that kind of stuff. Oh gosh, the encyclopedia is beginning. Oh gosh, stop. Yeah, but I would say, yeah, at the end of the day, I think there's only two directions that we as a species go. Either we give into the egoic dysfunction and we
Mhm.
completely just destroy ourselves and become extinct, which okay, honestly, I'm not too attached. If that
We're on
happens,
the
it's like okay,
way. We're on the
yeah.
way.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, well, global warming, yep, okay, we'll nuke ourselves and, either we give into that
Mhm,
or, through the process of awakening, finding peace and enlightenment and all those different things and finding fulfillment or whatever that means to us, I think we can transcend to a higher place. And I think the interesting thing about that journey from our present state to this higher state or this, transcendent
mhm,
level that we can work towards and reach is that very often for many people, suffering is their greatest spiritual teacher.
mhm,
Like for example, if I reference the Buddha, right? So kind of the general story of Saitama, the Buddha, of course, is that he was a prince. Essentially. So the story goes that he was a prince. I forget exactly where, but he basically had every single thing given to him in his life. It was just perfect. He had every single thing that he could ever want. He was just never allowed to go outside the palace walls and see anything. He had servants, he had attendants, he had everything. But one day, as people do, he wanted to see, okay, what's outside the walls of this
mhm,
perfection. And so he decided to venture outside. And the story goes is that he saw an old man hobbling. Then he asked his carriage driver, "Oh, what's wrong with him? What's up? What's happening to him?" And he said his carriage driver said, "We all get there. He's old. Old. What is that? Yes, it's when you age. This happens to all of us. And it'll happen to me. Yes, it'll happen to you too." And kind of that shook him to his core. Then he saw a few other people who were also suffering and sick, and kind of he saw what life was like outside of the perfect palace walls. And seeing that suffering kind of is what catalyzed his enlightenment and his awakening.
mm,
And I think, yeah, I think it's important to recognize that suffering, while it is so uncomfortable and painful and just everything all above, I think it's also out of necessity the primary way in which we awaken,
mhm.
in which we awaken spiritually.
Yeah, so I would to tie that in, like I agree with you, and that I would still say people are good, but to explain those evil things, not explain, but like to those evil things and bad things that have happened, that have created suffering. It's all a part of not to negate the
Mm,
how heavy those things
yeah,
are and
totally.
how
Hmm.
terrible they've been.
Hmm.
Um, like zooming out, super big,
Hmm.
picture. I don't know, maybe those are the things of like they had to happen as a species, as just the global, I said, consciousness, that
Hmm.
you have to learn through that suffering, and then we're able to continue on that,
Hmm.
that path. So maybe they are assisting us to getting into a place of good. And I don't know,
Hmm.
but
Yeah,
again,
I
not.
completely hear what you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, not to negate any of the
No,
horrible
of
things that
course
have ever
not.
happened throughout history, but it's uncomfortable. I don't like saying it, but if I'm being candid, I think if we were to zoom out super super big picture, and I hate saying this, but it's ultimately what I hold to be true. Well, what I believe to be true.
Mhm.
And I think when we zoom out big picture, I think everything is part of the greater order. I hate saying that because oftentimes, like, we've both been through really bad, crappy experiences, and kind of to say that, okay, this is part of the greater order doesn't mean that this is all for a reason. I don't think it's
Mhm.
necessarily reason, but I think it's kind of, I don't know.
Well, we're all
I
serving
don't
I
know.
think we're all serving something, like, way bigger than ourselves, so, like, you can
Mm,
get caught up in, "Oh, this happened to me,"
mm,
and it's bad for me, but it's like, well, really, like, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's not about any of us, it's like, there's other things happening. We're only here for whatever 100 years, let's say. Like, there's there's, like, ebbs and flows of your day-to-day life, week to week, on a yearly basis, right? Like, sometimes things are terrible, sometimes things are really good. It's like, that happens on a greater picture also. And you can continue going out and going out, you know what I mean? But
mhm.
anyway, I
Yeah.
think, yeah, all of that stuff is hopefully leading us
Mhm.
towards getting better as a species.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And I now that I'm thinking about it, I wouldn't necessarily say that these things happen for a reason because I just don't
Mhm.
like the wording of that. It's
No.
like, if you take someone who's like, I know people who've been through like really bad things. It's like, if you say to a parent whose kid has died that happened for a reason, I would never say that.
Right.
I think things happen and we make meaning from them and we learn from them. Through all of the painful things that we go through, I think we make the meaning in
Mhm.
retrospect.
Mhm.
And it's in hindsight that we find the lessons and that we grow. At least that's what I'd like to think,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm. Now we could take this, so we've gone very, like, out there.
Mhm. Totally.
We can bring it back because I think a lot of philosophical arguments, or, like, just I actually had a conversation the other day with somebody, like, and I think we should bring it back for a second, like, out of choice, to, like, the human experience,
Mm,
and that kinda thing, and psychology and all that kinda stuff, because
mm,
I genuinely think what we just talked about is, like, that's what's going on.
mm,
I think there's that stuff, but I think a lot of people would argue that maybe wouldn't wanna go that route, and they wanna
mm.
talk on tangible, like, the human experience, and I think the human experience is only a part of the experience, period, coming to theaters July 31st. Um, I don't know. Anyway, do you know what I mean? So let's bring it back to, like, human interaction, human psychology, and what's happened in the human experience, because that I think can go a different route potentially.
Hmm.
What do you think when I say that?
Repeat the question, please.
No, just like, there's not really a question, just
Oh.
like, what do you think on a less macro scale?
Mm,
Do you still think that it stands through? If you kind of ignore all the spiritual stuff that we just talked about, and say, like, based on experience, the terrible things are happening in the world, and, like, ego, and the way the brain works, and capitalism, and all these things, do you think people are good? If you take all that kind of big picture stuff out of the equation, and if we pretended that didn't exist, does it change?
to be honest, it doesn't change too much for me. I think we have I'm curious to see what the science says. I'm curious to
The
see what
science?
psychologists. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
I'm curious to see, like, kind of from, we're coming at it from a philosophical view, but I'm curious what perhaps scientists have found. Like, in
Mm,
our brain, is there a bias, like, towards good, or is there a bias towards, you know, quote unquote evil? And I'm trying to look some stuff up here as well.
yeah.
Like, are babies born with a moral compass? Because there's so many ways of viewing it. What's his face? Aristotle argues that morality is a learned thing and we're born as amoral creatures, like a blank slate, kind of thing.
Mm,
Wait. No, 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 no. Aristotle argues that let me read this so I'm not wrong. Okay. Aristotle argues that morality is learned and that we're born as amoral creatures. So kind of it's
mm,
just all gray.
right.
Whereas Sigmund Freud believes newborns to be a blank moral slate. Um, and then there's also Lord of the Flies. Oh, jeez.
Well, if you take that route,
Uh-huh.
that blank slate does not last very long because as soon as
Mhm,
that baby is placed in an that's just like they were floating around in some white
mhm.
space with nothing out, but as soon as they're put in an
Mm.
environment,
Yeah.
they're grabbing things from that environment, they're developing that instantly,
Mhm,
right? So it almost like it's like, yes, you could say in the womb maybe, but, like, as soon as they're in the world, I would say
mm,
not. I just looked up here's what I looked up into Google. Good question.
mm,
I said, "In our brain, is there a bias towards good or bad?" Great, thanks, Google.
mhm.
And all these things, I'm not gonna read any like, really any of them, but all the titles are like, "Our brain's negative biased. Why does your brain have a negativity bias? Overcome your brain's fixation on bad things." They all seem to be like, your brain focuses on negativity.
I think that's more so from a, like, problem-solving
Mhm,
view in the sense that the brain scans for problems. I was reading this in the book The Happiness Equation by Neil Pressfield. Great book, highly
mhm,
recommend. But basically your brain is not evolved to make you happy. Your brain
mm.
is evolved to survive. Keep in
Right.
mind for the past, thousands, millennia of human existence, we did not live in, houses and like listen
Mhm,
to podcasts and, like have conversations like this. For the longest while in human history, even for the last, 1,000 years, it was, I need to find food and shelter to survive. Otherwise,
mhm,
I will die. Nowadays, it's, I need to be happy or else I will die. Our brain is not evolved to find the things that make us content, the things that make us happy. Because in a survival setting back then, if we were to be content and be happy, we wouldn't go out hunting. We wouldn't, like
right,
do
of
do all
course.
those kinds of things, and we would die, of course.
Mhm,
So I think the negativity about the negativity bias applies to that in terms of problem solving, right? Finding things in order to
mhm,
fix them. Your brain doesn't naturally look for things that are good; it looks for predators,
right.
right? Um, I'm reading another thing here. I think an important thing to study for this question, like scientifically, is our babies.
Mhm.
You know, like I think that tells us a lot. I'm gonna read you this one piece from an article here. Okay. This is from BBC Earth. Babies less than a year old were made to watch a puppet show where different colored shapes acted in ways that were clearly recognizable as morally right or wrong. A red circle is shown struggling to climb a hill while an evil blue square tries to push it back down. Meanwhile, good yellow triangle attempts to help the red circle by pushing it up. After the play, the babies were asked which shape they wanted to play with, evil blue square or good yellow triangle. As you may have guessed, they all picked the latter, the triangle that exhibited helpful and selfless behavior. This
Mm.
applied even for babies as young as 7 months. The scene replicates the findings of a 2010 study from the Infant Cognition Center at Yale University, which went further to prove that babies were choosing the puppets because of their actions rather than other variables, for example, an innate preference or familiarity with a certain color or shape. When the show was replayed with the shapes taking on the opposite role, the infants still mostly chose the shape that had taken on the role of the helper.
That's really interesting.
And I think that makes sense to me because, once again, we're social creatures. We're evolved to live in tribes, and the way that we survive is by helping each other,
Right.
right?
If you're
If we
scary,
keep
I don't wanna be with you.
exactly right, if you keep in mind, like in a tribe, if you're an if you're a complete to everybody, you
Right.
get kicked out of the tribe and you die, right? If
Of
you're just
course,
like
yeah, yeah.
being mean, like your genes don't get to replicate. But I think being helpful and like encouraging, like making sure that the tribe is safe and everyone's living together peacefully and helpfully. I think that's where that bias comes from. So
Mm,
I'd say on a deep evolutionary level, we have both, is what
mhm,
I would say. And I'll find some studies on that. But I can see that we have a bias towards being helpful socially. But then on the other hand, there's also the amygdala, right? Because I think
mhm.
the helpfulness, like we're social creatures. Oh, I wish I read more on neuroscience before coming into this. Please fact check me on everything. Um, but the oh yeah, true, true, true. Wait, this is something I was thinking about. I think deeper, like, okay, so if we think about the brain, oh, I so want to be fact checked on this. If I'm wrong and neuroscience, please correct me. I'm perfectly willing to that. But this is kind of what I think, just based off of my reading and everything. Okay, so if we look at the brainstem, the innermost layer, if we look at the brain as a structure, the innermost layer, the deepest layer, is the brain stem. That's responsible for all of the involuntary things like breathing or heart, uh, basically all those things. And then as it goes outwards, um, skipping over a few things, then there's the amygdala, which is the survival,
Mhm.
right? That's where the fight or flight reflex lives. Then as we go out more and more, then we get the hippocampus, which is for fine motor movements, and then we hippocampus. Wait, no, wait, no. Sorry, not the hippocampus. The not the cortex, the cerebellum, I believe. Ooh, I'm so sorry. We have another part of the brain. I think it's the cerebellum that's responsible for fine motor movements and coordination. And then
Mhm.
as we go out more, we have the cortex, which is responsible for seeing, hearing, the senses. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is the newest evolved part of the brain, which is responsible for rational thinking, for essentially like a civilized society.
Right.
And kind of what I've come to the conclusion of is that kind of those layers of evolution and how the brain grew and evolved kind of is the it's kind of the hierarchy of the most powerful brain structures in
Of
the sense
course.
that they're the ones that we have the most tendency towards. For
Mhm.
example, when you're in a fight or flight state and you're like panicking and stuff and you're trying to get out of it, can you think about a math problem using a prefrontal cortex?
Right.
No, the fight or flight reflex, the amygdala, bypasses and overrides that, right? Even like, or if you're in a fight or flight state and you're trying to play the piano, trying to do something with like, your fine motor
Mhm.
reflexes, fine motor control, can you do that? No, right? The amygdala, because it's an older system, bypasses the newer evolved ones. It goes deeper into the brainstem too. Obviously, like when you're in a fight or flight state, you're still breathing, your heart is still going. So that, you know, takes precedence over
Mhm.
that. Where was I going with this? Right. So I would say kind of the helpful, compassionate bit, based off of what I think, kind of exists in a newer evolved part of the brain. Whereas the amygdala that drives like survival and fear and, you know, greed essentially kind of is an older part of the brain that can easily override the newer part.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. And that like, taking that into consideration, then the longer that humans stay alive and evolve, the better we'll be at living. I mean, I guess we're starting to see that, you know what I mean? Like,
I'd hope so.
society is hopefully going in a overall, like, things are changing, people are being open to stuff. It's like you would think then, you're taking that the way you explain that we're going to get better at those things because it'll have been around longer, and the longer it's around and the more we evolve, we know how to, utilize it. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
Hmm. Totally. So I think in social contexts we can be good, but I think our environment plays a huge role. Like it's
Yes.
hard to expect, people to be good when they live in a really bad environment.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing is, bringing it back to what we talked about at the start, um, when Yes Theory was visiting Syria, like it's a very, very rough environment, right?
Of
And if we were
course.
to say that the environment is like makes people bad or good, then that would kind of be like we'd be blind then to like what about all the good people that he met along his trip there,
Mhm.
right? All the
Mhm.
nice, helpful, friendly people. Is it really our environment, or is it our decisions? So, anyways, we
Yeah, I
wanted to
would
go back down,
no,
but I went
totally
back
though.
up.
It would
I'm
be
so
like
sorry.
where, we are good. People are good, but it's influenced by their environment, our environment, and these things that you're talking about. But that doesn't mean that it's not there somewhere. Even if someone's acting in a not good way,
Hmm,
it's probably because of other things and it's been changed, but it doesn't mean at its core that that person is not a good person. Like, you know what I mean? And that could be, I think you could still push that to the extremes. That, like, some way this person got to this place where they would be considered bad. They're a bad person doing bad things. But I think, I don't know how, but there's a way if you could strip back all of those other things and get back to, like, who they really are, like, at the core of their being or whatever. Like, I think that would be
mhm.
good. It's just been influenced by other things.
Totally. Yeah. Another perspective, bring in another perspective to this while we're talking about kind of moral development and everything. I was just trying to look up just to clarify what Sigmund Freud's theory on moral development was, and basically to sum it up, according to Freud, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this. So, getting a reaction to this. Moral development proceeds when the individual's selfish desires, selfish, like kind of dark shadow self, animalistic desires, are repressed and replaced by the values of important socializing agents in one's life. So basically, he's saying the individual selfish animal desires are tamed by society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What do you think about
that's
that?
kind of what I'm saying. Like this is society, but like your environment, and
Mhm.
if you're put in an environment with a bunch of loving, kind, caring people, and that's all that you know, then those things are overridden, like you're saying.
Mhm.
So I would agree. I would agree with that
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
then you're not being influenced. I mean, I would explain it the other way around. Like he's saying, it can be changed and be a good thing, like all those selfish things. But I would say that the wrong environment would make that person who is innately calm and
Mhm.
not egocentric or whatever. You know what I mean? Like all of that I think is exploited in the wrong environment. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yep. I totally feel you.
Mhm. Yeah. I think
Well, what a lovely philosophical discussion. I'm curious to hear what you guys viewing think about this. Make sure that you visit us on YouTube, leave a comment below, join this discussion. Or if you're listening to the podcast, make sure that you leave us a nice rating. Let us know what you think about this episode. We're curious to hear your thoughts, your insights. And if you can fact check me, please fact check me.
let us know. Is Amir correct or not? Probably way
I'm
more than you
open.
think.
I'm open to being wrong, but
It's good
yeah.
though. No, you got the you still got the essence, I think, of what you're trying to share. I got it. I got it. I think everybody else
Thank
did.
you.
This was what we jokingly say, philosophy in 30 minutes or something.
Yes, philosophy in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into the Philosophy in 30 Minutes channel. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Visit us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Talk About Life Pod. And for more information, head on over to harrisonkingofficial.com/podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and have a deep, meaningful conversation in your own life.